Welcome to She Sells Radio. I am so excited for today's conversation because I know that I personally am going to get to learn a ton about building and leading a powerful sales team, and you will too. And our guest today is one of the very best in the industry in this field. And his specialty is helping companies scale from 0 to 25 million annual recurring revenue. So I will say yes, please to that. But I want you to listen in regardless of where you are on the scale. And even if you're an individual sales contributor, especially if you're a sales leader, which I know a ton of our listeners are, this conversation is going to be hugely impactful for you. And I'll share a quick personal anecdote about my guest today, Scott Leese, and then I'll share some of his formal background so you've got a better sense of who you're learning from today. So last week, I had the pleasure of going on the podcast that Scott co-hosts with Richard Harris. So the Surf and Sales podcast, go check it out if you haven't listened yet. And after the show, Scott quoted something that I said on LinkedIn. And I cannot tell you the volume of messages and outreach I got from people who follow him from his huge community saying, oh my gosh, Scott quoted you. This is a big deal. Like, we listen to Scott adamantly. We trust anything he says. And so that just goes to show the power of who this man is, his personal character, and also the power of the brand and reputation that he's built in his space. So let me share just a quick personal bio and credentials, and then we're going to dive into the interview. Scott Leese is one of the top startup sales leaders in the country. Through domestic and international consulting as a strategic advisor, he's trained an army of salespeople and sales leaders, thousands strong. Scott put his nearly 2 decades of sales and leadership experience to use as the CEO and founder of Scott Leese Consulting, Surf and Sales, and Thursday Night Sales. Based in Austin, Texas, Scott is a 3-time winner of the top 25 inside sales professionals by the American Association of Inside Sales, a 3-time author, and a highly sought after consultant, advisor, leader, and sales trainer. Scott, welcome to the podcast.
Hi there. Thanks for having me.
Hi, we're so excited to have you. Now, are you still, as I was reading that, I was like, I know you just moved. Are you still in Austin?
I still live in Austin. Yeah.
Got it.
Been here for 11 years or so now after leaving San Francisco.
Nice. Awesome. So this is just a purely personal question because I love the concept behind Surf and Sales. And I want to dive into everything you do today with Scott Leese Consulting and in the leadership side. But what was the inspiration behind Surf and Sales specifically? I just think that's such a cool niche and brand.
Yeah, this was back in 2017. And I was kind of teasing Richard Harris, my now partner, but we were on a family vacation together in Costa Rica. And I was giving him grief because he had to go to this conference in St. Louis and this one here. And I was just like, oh my God, this sounds horrible. You know, the big conference scene is like, it's not for me. You wander the halls and scan your badge, and it's just this big pitch fest. And you really make all these superficial kind of connections. And I'm a little bit of a wallflower by nature. So I don't like all that. I'm much more introverted. I'd rather go someplace with a smaller group of people and really get to know them and have the kind of impact of those conversations be a little more heartfelt and a little stronger, maybe. Yeah. So I said, how come nobody has a conference in a cool place like this? And we were in Costa Rica surfing at the time. And he was like, well, why don't you build one? And I said, well, why don't you help me? It's better 2, brands and 2 people than one. And he said, fine, if you decide to put it together, I'll do it. And that was in November. And by February, we had, launched the business. In May, I think, was our first official event. So we take about 20 people at a time, a couple times a year down to Costa Rica and teach them how to surf and get cooks and cleaners and surf instructors and the whole 5-star treatment. And we rent these villas right on the beach and kind of split the day with fun as well as content and education. And it's been going on a few years strong. We get sponsors for it and we sell it out all the time. And it's a good little, side business.
Wow. That's so cool. And I love that. And I so agree with what you said about and to me, and it's like, you and I are just getting to know each other, which is fun, but I feel already from what I know of you, so much of what you do is about pushing the needle a bit in the sales world, like in a good way, like helping people think deeper, helping people not just do things the same way that they've always done just because it's how they've done it, right? And whether it's the old conference scene where you just wander the halls and, like you said, you build superficial relationships. It's like, how can we do that differently? How can we do that better? But I want to go deeper on something you said that I think is so interesting, because you mentioned like that you're a little bit more of an introvert, right? You identify more that way. And one of the things that you're great at is recruiting and team building. And so I want to really lean into that for today's conversation, because we actually haven't talked about that a ton on the podcast. So this is like hugely important. We're near 180 episodes now. So it's like, we got to dive into this and talk about this more. And I think it's going to be helpful for people to hear, like, you don't have to be, the typical extroverted person necessarily to be great at team building and recruiting. So tell me a little bit, like, have you always been great at team building and recruiting? Was it just natural for you? How did it become one of your core superpowers?
Well, I think some of it, for whatever reason, was a bit innate. I grew up playing every sport you could think of, and I played a bunch of sports in high school and played 2 sports in college. And I was always kind of the captain or the kid organizing the games and that kind of thing. And I had, I think, enough confidence in that realm, in that arena, to be a little more outspoken. And it got, more pronounced the older that I got. But socially, like, you take me out of that environment and I would lean, way back the other way. And I tend to have a bunch of friends who are really outgoing and gregarious. And I just sort of like hang out and laugh at whatever they're doing and whoever they're attracting to the group and all that. So when I got into business, I thought, well, I don't want to hire a bunch of people like me, because I'm used to being surrounded by these different types of folks and kind of putting them all together and more like just kind of helping them and telling them what to do a little bit. I'm kind of thinking about being on the field and like barking instructions at everybody. Go here, Elise, go left, go right, or whatever. So I kind of constructed my teams in a different way originally than other people would. In early 2000s, when I was getting started, it was like the feedback would be, hire everybody like you. Scott, you're an athlete, you're super competitive, you're this, you're that. Go get everybody like you. And I just somehow innately was like, no, I don't want to do that. I need people who are more outgoing than me. I need people who have more energy than me. I need people who think differently than me. I need somebody who's more humble than me. I need somebody who wants to be coached more than me. And so I constructed these teams that were diverse, but nobody was talking about diversity back then. I just did it. And so I had more women on my team. I had ex-cons on my team. I had people of color on my team. And I was this gang of misfits at the time. And I just kind of kept that philosophy rolling. And when you are a bit of an introvert, one of the things that was natural for me, at least, is if I elevate everybody else up around me, the spotlight goes away from me. And I'm like, this is perfect. Like, I will win and get what the results that I'm looking for and the, comp that I'm looking for and all that stuff. But everybody else gets the spotlight. So I just need to do things to make them shine. And I can just kind of hang out here smiling and be happy for them. And so, it just, nobody taught it to me. There wasn't all these resources that there are now. There was no podcast. There was no LinkedIn. I just did it and got lucky with it, frankly.
So I want to ask a little more about a few things you said there that I think are so important. So as you were talking through those examples of like, I want to look for people who are more this than me, more that than me, more, it was so interesting. And it made me think like, and maybe it's not this systematized, right? Because some of this stuff is just, it's like, sometimes it's just our gift and it's our talent and it's organic, but are there, if we're thinking about building and scaling out a sales team, like whether you're an early stage entrepreneur listening to this and you're like, at some point, I know I'm going to need people to sell for me. Maybe you're a sales leader and you're in charge of recruiting. Are there like certain prompts you take people through to think through, like, you need this type of person, you need that type of person, like to help us just kind of start to think differently? Or is it just super organic and you kind of just let it flow like that?
Well, what I didn't say was, in the beginning, it was really organic. But as you get older and get more experience and perspective, you create systems out of these things that have worked.
Yeah.
So if you were to, hire me now as your VP of sales, I got a whole system and a whole process. It's like, okay, we need the outgoing person. We need somebody who used to be a teacher. We need somebody who used to sell drugs and got arrested and is a little bit wild.
I love that that's in the list, by the way.
It is what it, hey, I'm just being honest.
This is the secret side. No, I love it. I love
it. I need somebody who comes from SMB sales. I need somebody from mid-market. I need somebody from enterprise. And this is how we get started. And we then optimize for what's working best. And for whatever reason, each sale is a little bit different. This type of person might not work. Okay, we don't want that anymore. We optimize for this. And then over time, we really got it, dialed in. And one thing that I learned over the years about building a team like this is if you're not careful and intentional, it can all fall apart. Like if I stop thinking about with intentionality, having these different types of people, I can fall into a trap of, I just found, 5 D1 athletes in a row. They're all white males in their 30s. And it's like, oh shit, how did that happen? Now I look at my team and I'm like, it doesn't look the same as I've always kind of wanted it. So you have to keep the intentionality up front, and you're just looking to find people that are bits and pieces of you, maybe, rather than hiring just you.
Got it. And did you have a situation where that happened, where it was like, oh my gosh, like I forgot to
it happens all the time, all the time to everybody. Even when you're intentional about it, you can fall into the trap. One place you fall into the trap is before you know it, the sales team looks right, but the sales leadership team doesn't.
Right.
That
makes sense.
And like this person emerged, and now we're ready to hire our third and fourth manager. And I'm like, the best candidates, I think, look all the same. And I don't know if this is the right move and whatnot. Right. And so one way that I got around that is I started optimizing a lot more for people who can do instead of people who have done. Meaning,
say more about that.
I'm a big fan of giving people their first opportunity to do something. So I can go hire somebody who's got 5 years sales leadership experience and bring them in as my sales manager. Or I can hire you, Elise, who's sold pretty well, if not fantastic, but pretty well, but who has innate charisma and leadership abilities and is process oriented and data driven. And I'm just like, I can teach her how to be a sales manager. So I started promoting people that had never done it before and growing a team kind of organically like that. Right. And that was one of the ways that I would kind of get around it, is I didn't care as much about what somebody had on their resume. I cared a lot more about kind of who they are and their capacity to grow into something, so long as I put in the right amount of effort to help them get there.
That makes sense. And it's kind of the same as what people say about hiring for culture rather than skill set necessarily. And emphasizing that more.
Yeah.
Okay. That makes total sense. And I love that. So can do versus have done. Okay. I'm just taking mental notes here. Okay. Awesome. Tell me about, this was so interesting because when you had me on your show last week and Richard, your co-host, was talking about one of your superpowers. I think the way he said it was close, at least, was that Scott is a collector of people, which sounds, when I say it all, it's like, I don't know, that could sound weird if you don't know the context.
Yeah, I mean, out of context, it sounds like a little bit manipulative.
But which is not at all, because that's not who you are. But when he said that, I was like, that's an amazing skill set. And obviously you've got, it really blew me away last week when I had so many people reach out to me unprompted, but it was just because you had quoted me and they were like, oh my gosh, like, we love Scott. We're loyal to him. We listen to what he says. If he mentions you, like, we want to know you. So thank you, by the way, for the share. But it was like, this man knows how to do it. Like, which is so important for team building, for recruiting. So you shared a little bit on the show last week, but I'd love if you could share with our listeners, how do you do that? How do you build such loyal relationships? How do you build this almost army of people who, like, they're there when you need them? They want to join you on the projects that you're part of. Tell us a little bit about that, because I think that's such an incredible skill.
Well, for one, you have to be willing to put in a tremendous amount of time and energy and effort to show up for them.
Mm,
So even if they're not on your team per se, and they're just people in your network, it appears by being responsive. So all these messages that you get, I respond to all of them. Doesn't matter what platform or what mechanism of communication, could be text, could be Slack, could be LinkedIn, whatever. I reply to everybody other than the like bot spammy
yeah.
kind of things.
Yeah. I want to
So
just
that,
pause you super quick on that if I can, because that is, to me, like that is such an amazing skill. And how do you manage that? Because even this morning, like I needed something from you, you wrote me back right away. How do you manage to be so responsive and still build and grow your company? This, like, I want to just pause on a moment for that, because I think that is a real talent. So,
well, see, I don't look at it as a talent, and I'm open to being wrong. Maybe it
sure.
is,
Okay.
but I don't look at it as a talent. I just look at it as intentionality. Like that is a priority for me. My
Mm,
priority is when somebody reaches out and asks me for something, my priority is to give them what they want or what they need as fast as possible. So
mm,
I am not a blocker, and I am always considered helpful. And I'm
mm,
always like, okay, Scott needs to be in my top 5 speed dial, because if I need this thing, I know I'm going to get it, preferably within this amount of time. And I'm not
okay.
perfect at it. You know, at the time, I just happened to be sitting at my computer in between calls, saw your note come in, and I knew that I was, scheduled to be working with you later. So I'm like, I need to reply to that instantaneously.
Yeah.
And so I did. So I monitor all of these things.
Mm,
I'm not somebody who turns all my notifications off.
okay.
My notifications are on.
Got it.
Now, that requires a tremendous amount of focus in being able to look at the notification and cipher real quick, respond now, respond later.
Yeah.
But I look at all of those things. I don't overthink my response. I don't write a massive paragraph. I don't remember. I probably wrote like 5 or 6 words, and I was like, you can pull from my LinkedIn profile, or here's another picture.
Yeah.
Fairly like abrupt, not super professional, super casual.
Yeah.
Right. So my responses are often that way. It's like a thought off the cuff rather than a deep, passage like, dear Elise, I was thinking deeply about your request. No, I don't write like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I kind of respond to people the way I would text to somebody that I'm already friends with. So that helps me move very quickly.
Yeah.
Right.
I love, yeah. 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 I love it. And to your point of like, you don't want to be a blocker. I think it's a good mindset. And it's something that was a selfish question for me, but I go back and forth. I'm big on like focus time and notifications off and chunks of time to process inboxes. But then with that, sometimes it's like, it can take a few days to respond to things, which is like something I want to work on getting better at. So that's why I'm always curious to talk to people like you.
For me,
Yeah.
I couldn't do that.
Yeah.
I can't do that. That would give me a tremendous amount of anxiety to be like, I have 3 days worth of emails to reply to.
Yeah.
I can't do that. Now, when you apply this to building community and like collecting people, well, these people that reach out to you, I don't know who they are, but most likely I have done 4, 5, and 6 things for them over X amount of time.
Yeah.
I gave them advice on something. I talked to them about something personal or professional. I, share content or bring in and do coaching for them, or I've helped. There's all this stuff. So when I kind of send out the bat signal, if I need help with something, I've got a bunch of people willing to step in and help, and people who are willing to do it, free of charge. Right? Just because they're like, I need to pay you back. Right. And this is one way that I'm going to kind of pay you back. And I'm fiercely loyal. Like once I know who somebody is, I don't ask questions. If you're just like, hey, Scott, I need X, Y, and Z, I don't ask questions as to why. I don't need the backstory or the context. I'm just going to help you get what you want.
Get it done.
I care more about the individual than I do about a company. So if you come to me for advice and you work at Salesforce, I'll pick on them since we're both in their group. I'm giving you advice that is right for a lease,
Mm.
not necessarily right for Salesforce.
Yeah.
And people pick up on the sincerity of that.
Mm.
And when they know that you care, they're going to be loyal to you. So when I'm managing people, when I was an operator, they knew I cared about their success more than mine and their success more than the company's. And I was invested in that.
Wow.
I ran one-on-ones differently. I didn't talk about your pipeline and your forecasts. I started one-on-ones just with like, hey, how's it going? Like, what's going on in your life today? You asked me how my weekend was.
Yeah.
I would go for little walks with people and talk about all that kind of thing. And I would always just say, how can I make your job easier?
Wow.
And maybe at the very end, I'd be like, hey, real quick, what is it looking like? How are you feeling about the rest of July? We've got like a week left.
Yeah.
Whereas most managers jump in, they're like, okay, at least it's Monday the 25th. We've got 6 business days left.
Right.
What are we looking at?
Yeah.
Well, I didn't do it that way. I didn't really care about all that stuff. I just felt like if I could help people feel good about themselves and feel like I was there to help get things, out of their way, then they would in turn perform better. And so I apply that even to people who I don't really know and who I couldn't pick out of a lineup.
Yeah.
And I think that helps me, create and sell out events like Surf and Sales, or build a business like Thursday Night Sales, or my Patreon group, or get people who read books that I've written and then, they go read reviews and they share things and all that kind of stuff. I think that's where it comes from.
It's such a, and I'm not just saying this because you're on the show, but it's like, it is such a refreshing approach. And I think that question of, what did you say? How can I make your job easier?
Yeah.
Is that like that's the primary question you would ask?
Yeah,
in
how do I
every
make your
one-on-one?
job easier today?
And that was like the go-to. It's like, let me just kind of like what you were saying before about, let me not block things. Let me like help get stuff out of your way. How can I make your job easier? That was always, that's the mindset.
Yeah. And that's the mindset. And then the key is obviously delivering on it. It doesn't work if you say, listen, Scott, I'm blocked by a product team. I can't get these particular deals. Like, I'm super frustrated. Okay, I'm going to go fight that battle for you. You don't have to worry about that. And then I go fight that battle and I provide an update. It's not one of these things that where you go to your boss and say, hey, I've got an issue with product, and 6 weeks go by and you never hear anything again. And then the rep is like, hey, whatever happened with that? And I'm like, oh, I'm working on it. Like, no, I'm telling them, like, I just messaged so-and-so. I'll let you know what they say. Hey, so-and-so just messaged me back. This is where we're at. Hey, I need this thing. And they can see me actively engaged on it. And that level of transparency around the work being done in the back room, in the rooms they're not allowed in, it's uncommon. Now, that would get me in trouble quite a bit, by the way.
I was going to ask about that because I could see that. Yeah.
It would get me in trouble a lot of times with, C-levels and other execs in the company, because they're like, you're oversharing or whatever. I said, no, I'm trying to create a transparent environment. I'm trying to make my people trust me, and I'm trying to make them trust you, and I'm trying to make them perform at their optimal level. And I really don't care if it is upsetting to you that they know how slow you're operating, or they know that you missed your fucking deadline. The product team knows when sales misses their quota. How come the sales team doesn't get to know when the product team misses their release date?
Yeah.
I don't understand that. Yeah. So but my teams would know Scott will go fall on that sword and fight that war, because he can have those arguments and conversations and survive them. And if I, the rep, do it, I'm in big trouble. Right. So delivering, when you say, how can I make your job easier? What's a blocker in your way that I can get rid of today? Delivering on it. Now they come to you all the time. And they share things that they otherwise let fester and kind of eat away at them. Right. That's the goal, at least.
Yeah. Makes total sense. It makes total sense. And I feel like you've already, like, we've touched on some of the key things here. I want to talk a little bit about what are some of the things that people miss when building and growing a sales team. I think you've already mentioned some of it, which is in that intentionality behind sourcing and recruiting people who are different from you. that transparent communication, the proactive communication with your team, even if it means, you're going to have to fall on the sword for it later. Are there any other things that you see that are big that people miss or don't think of that really make a difference when building and recruiting a powerful sales team?
Well, they don't document enough things. I mean, if you come from a sales leadership perspective, you have got to put a process in place. This is how we reach out to people. This is how we run our demos. This is how we follow up. This is when we send contracts. This is what constitutes a opportunity. All these things.
Yeah.
The biggest mistake that companies make when they're first getting started building sales is they don't document all that stuff. There's no process around anything. Elise sells one way, Scott sells a different way.
Yeah.
Scott doesn't like to take the time to put anything in the CRM. Elise has her own system in Excel. The tool that we bought doesn't even get used. It's just absolute wild, wild west chaos.
Yeah.
You can actually get to a particular level of revenue and a particular size team with everything being messy like that. You can get to a couple $1 million of revenue for sure. But what happens when you need to go from 1 or 2 salespeople to 10? How do you onboard those people? How do you know what works?
Yeah.
How do you know what process to tee them up with? So that's one of the things that I, learned in my sales leadership journey. When I was a rep and I moved to sales manager for the first time, I just wrote down all the things that worked for me. And I'm like, hey, this is what worked for me. This is our playbook. I want you all to follow this. And, it would work. And new things that people would be trying, I'd kind of incorporate into my playbook, and the thing would become a living, breathing document. So it was never stagnant. It was never only tactics from Scott from 7 months ago. It was always alive, and we were adding to it all the time, making it more and more robust. And so as new people came in, they had this plethora of information, whether it's ICP information, buyer persona information, objections and rebuttals, competitive landscape, whatever the things are. And now what I do in my job really is I help people build these sales playbooks and these sales processes, and help with recruiting, and help with coaching and training and executing on the playbook and strategy all around it. That's the number one thing that people screw up when they're building a sales org. They have no process around anything. And it's often the founder. Let's pick on you, for example.
Yeah.
You have your own way of getting business and getting clients that,
right.
If you hired somebody in to be your first sales rep today, they are not going to be as good as you. So how are you expecting them to perform at that level? You have to get what has worked for you out of your head and onto paper.
Yeah.
So they can follow it. And most people don't do that. Most people in your position would be like, listen, Scott, when you pitch somebody, tell them this, and, go do it and you'll get the hang of it. And off you go. I'm busy. And the rep is like, whoa, what the fuck? I don't really know what I'm supposed to do. Like, I don't have your personality. I don't have your connections. Nobody knows me. Uh-oh.
Right.
So that's the number one thing people screw up.
That is hitting home. That's literally the world that I'm in right now, is systematizing everything in our businesses. We're about to start certifying consultants and bringing people in. And it's been very Wild West, to your point. And it's like, I love and I was curious. I was like, okay, what's the number it works until? So like a couple million, it can work until, but after that, I felt that for a while, like we got to get everything systematized and structured.
Yeah. I don't want to make it sound too easy, but it's fairly easy to do $1 million business this Wild West way.
I would agree.
You want to take your coaching business beyond $1 million into like 10 million. You can't operate Wild West anymore.
Yeah.
You have to get really tight and systematize and codify everything. It's the only way that it works.
When do you start? Is it ever too soon to start documenting that? Even if let's say you're a solopreneur listening, it's like, no, start documenting today.
No, you should have it documented now. When I would get hired, let me give you a story. The last time I was hired as an operator was 2016. And I got hired by this company to come in and build the sales team out. I spent 2 weeks kind of just trying to figure out, my head from my feet, and how does this product work? How does this industry work? And I started writing all these different documents out, all this busy work, Didn't do any selling whatsoever. Just busy work, busy work, busy work. Yeah. And I emerged after a couple of weeks with like, okay, here's who we're going to sell to and why. Here's who these people are and how they think and what their pains are. Here's what our outreach is going to look like. Here's our cold call script. Here's our emails. Here's how I think we're going to handle these objections, all this stuff. Here's how we're going to track everything. And then I went out and started trying to sell it. And we closed 18 deals the first month. And for the 2 years prior to that, they had 0 paying customers. 0.
Wow.
Now they were building, they spent a long time building and perfecting the product, but they had hired 3 reps before I ever got there who were there for months, who hadn't closed anything.
Wow.
But what was the difference? Well, the difference is I put everything on paper straight away. I did all this dirty work from day one, basically, that nobody wants to do. It's not fun. It's a lot more fun to pick up the phone and try to close deals.
Yeah.
The pressure is on you from day one if you get hired as this head of sales to go close deals and chase the revenue straight away and make those reps' job easier. So I resisted that urge. I had a more long-term kind of vision in mind. $1 today means nothing to me. I need to set us up to earn thousands of dollars later on.
Yeah.
So just get out, just let me do this. Let me build all this stuff. Now I roll this thing out to these 3 reps that were there and I start executing it alongside of them myself. They see it working for me. They have a little more belief. I close a deal. I help them close 1 or 2. Oh shit, this actually works.
Yeah.
And now you're off.
That's insane. 2 years with 0 sales to 18 in a month. It's anyone who's listening who's been resistant around documenting processes. I mean, if that doesn't get you going, man, that's insane. That's awesome. I want to ask a couple more questions and then we'll tell everyone where to connect with you because you've got so many great resources and places where people can go. I'm just curious from where you're sitting because you've got your finger pretty strong on the pulse, I think, of just sales landscape, what's coming. As we record this, it's Q3 2022. So obviously people are going to be listening to this all different times, but what do you see coming in the world of sales that's changing or that's different or that's something we should be thinking about as we go into 2023 and beyond?
This is a difficult question, which is
get your crystal ball.
Yeah. Well, I think that the old guard is kind of being replaced and ushered out a little bit. There's more women in sales than ever before. Yeah. There's more people of color in sales than ever before. And you see now those people starting to get in leadership roles. And that's when the real change, I think, starts to occur because you will inherently build a team different than me. And somebody else who's of a different minority group might build a team different. And the culture that you build is going to be different. So you can see, at least from my vantage point, the landscape of who in sales is changing, who's in sales is changing. The way we think about things like compensation and commission is starting to change. For example, there's conversations all the time now about no commission sales orgs. That conversation was never had for the last 20 years. The old guard, who is people like me, primarily mid to late 40s and early 60s and whatnot, all this like pro in office all the time stuff from these white, rich American men like me. Go to the office. No, people don't want to go to the office anymore. People want flexibility now. Yeah. Some people want to go to the office. I don't know a single person who wants to commute 30 minutes each direction twice a day. So you have to provide opportunity there, or you're going to lose the recruiting war around that. If you try to force people into an office 5 days a week in Austin only, you're not going to be able to get the same kind of talent. So I think there's a battle brewing between the people who want flexibility and remote versus the people who want everybody in office to remain kind of in control. I think you're going to start to see a consolidation of tech. There's no way that everybody can afford and manage 20 different vendors in their tech stack. It's untenable.
It's insane. Yeah.
It's untenable. So you're going to start to see some of the bigger players, I think, gobble up some of these other tech companies and bundle in their products and services, so we consolidate kind of the tech stack. And if you want a real like wacky off the wall prediction,
yeah,
I have this belief that artificial intelligence will progress to the point where you might not actually have to talk to a human at all to have a sales conversation. And people say, no, that'll never happen, Scott. You have to have a human to understand tone and interaction and intent and all of these kinds of things. And I'm like, well, I've watched a lot of science fiction movies.
Yeah.
You're coming from the perspective that the AI can't do those things, but I actually wonder if they will be able to. So if I jump on a sales call, as long as I've programmed in exactly what somebody is supposed to say and how they're supposed to respond, we know, and it just becomes a formula. If you ask me this question about which package makes the most sense for me, or you give me this objection, no, I don't think now is the right time. If we can load those things into some artificial intelligence, I'm not sure that a human being will be needed in a sales role 100 years from now. We'll see. Maybe sooner than that.
Yeah, I would say even before. I mean, as you say that, it's like I don't doubt that at all. I would imagine there's companies working on that right now.
I would imagine. People get real mad when I say that.
Do they really?
Yeah, and I think it's kind of fun to think about a little bit. I don't know. I could be completely wrong. It could be a insane, idea, but I can see it being possible.
Oh yeah. Absolutely. One of my clients says his whole brand is around like, how do you build loyalty when so much of your job is being taken over by AI? He works with a lot of realtors and mortgage lenders. And it's like so much of it's already done by AI that I wouldn't be surprised if what you're saying.
Yeah. Happens. And if we could stay there for a minute, people are educated now to the point where they ask themselves, why am I paying 6%? Why am I paying 3% to the seller's agent and 3% to the buyer's agent for them doing arguably not that much work? Yeah. And why is all this paperwork still in existence? Why do I have to physically sign wet ink, a mountain of paperwork to buy a home?
Yeah.
How is that possible still? So I think that these things are, there's a little bit of a sea change coming in a lot of these areas. So that's some of my predictions.
Oh, I like it. That got good. I like where that went. And to what you were talking about before, that probably kind of loops in and just ties in with the importance of, none of us knows how much of what we're doing is going to be automated someday. None of us knows how much of it's going to be taken over by AI. Quite a bit of it probably will. But I think the one thing we can do is we can build relationships. We can build loyalty. We can build our brand. We can evolve, like all the things you've talked about today. And I think when you've got that mindset, stuff changes, things happen, but it's like you'll rise above, you'll succeed, you'll find your path. So
and I think if you do all those things, what you've created is employment security for yourself. You'll always be able to find another job. People worry too much about job security, which is, how do I stay in this particular role?
Yeah,
that doesn't actually matter. What matters is, if this particular role you're in today falls apart for whatever reason, can you land another role of equal or superior value, and in how fast a period of time? It's the difference between employment and job security.
Yeah, that's a good point. I want to ask one final question, and then Scott, I want you to tell everyone where they can connect with you. So one of the things that I love doing when we have male guests on the show is just giving a shout out to a woman in your life. And it's not about, I know you may be thinking of like 5 women right now who are important, so it may be hard sometimes to pick one, but I would love to hear from you. Like, who is a woman who's been most influential in your life, one of the most influential in your life, and what is the biggest life lesson that you've learned from her?
Well, my grandmother on my mom's side would probably be the overall most influential woman in my life. She would have been 98 years old a couple days ago.
Oh, wow.
She was a tiny, like 4'11", 100% Sicilian woman who came over from Sicily on the boat to Brooklyn and then moved to Buffalo. And Fun fact, little known fact about me, my family has deep mob ties in Italy.
Wow.
And she went through a lot of hell. Like her house got blown up when she was a kid.
Oh my
Her
gosh.
mother died. They were coming after her father for debts and things like that. So from a very early age, she was basically running the household.
Oh my gosh.
So she's from like age 12 or 13, she was caretaking her sisters and cousins and all this kind of thing. And she was a very funny kind of personality. She would always just do these little expressions like, it is what it is. And we'd say, don't you want to see this world before you leave it? And she said, what for? And this, all this kind of stuff. We'd try to celebrate her birthday and she'd be like, an old woman's an old woman. She just has all these funny, like little sayings and philosophies. But I can remember, in my life, I was very, very sick in my early 20s. I spent a lot of time, 4 years in the hospital. And when I was out finally and kind of healing, I was on a lot of medicine and a lot of drugs, and I had to kick off of all these drugs. I remember calling her up at like 3 a.m, no concept of time, and just saying, hey, do you want to go walk the dogs? And she was at my house within 5 or 10 minutes. And we went for a walk in the middle of the freaking night. She didn't ask why, she didn't have some big message. She was just there. So I could go on and on about her, but her name was Antonina Di Gregorio.
Wow.
And that's my most influential woman.
Oh my gosh. I love that. What's the number one lesson you learned from her? Like the number one life lesson you learned from her?
Resiliency. And that you always have another gear no matter what. Wow. Even when you don't think so.
Wow. Amazing. Antonita, did you say?
Antonina.
Yeah. Wow. Sending her love. That's amazing. That's amazing. Scott, I've loved this conversation. Tell our listeners, please, where can they go to connect with you? I know you've got a lot of different ways people can get involved. So check the show notes for all the links. But tell us a little bit about where they can go to get involved with you.
Well, the easiest place to just interact with me is probably on LinkedIn. You can send me a direct message. I'm happy to reply to everybody. My consulting website, if you're looking for help building and scaling your sales team. If you ever want to go to one of the Surf and Sales events, check that out. I host 2 events weekly, one through a company called Thursday Night Sales, which is the world's largest virtual sales happy hour. And I host 90-minute trainings every Tuesday, and I bring in guests to do some of the trainings. So it's not just me, through my Patreon group as well. So check out some of those resources, and Elise will share them in the show notes. So.
Yeah. Absolutely. We'll link them all. This was amazing. Thank you, my friend, for coming on and sharing your expertise. And like I said, I knew going into this, I'd learn a ton from you, and I really did. And just super grateful for your time.
You're welcome. A lot of fun. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure. All right. To you, my listener, thank you so much for tuning in today. And I know you're going to want to connect with Scott. So go connect with Scott on LinkedIn. Go check out all the sites linked in the show notes. I'm so grateful for you as a listener of She Sells Radio, and I'll see you on our next episode. Bye for now.